You're listening to Not Good Enough, an inadequate response to inadequate responses. My name is Mitch Alexander.
I'm Tom McLean.
And I'm Evie.
No Lang this week, but we do have Isaac here keeping us all in check, as should be the case, I feel, in this day and age.
Everybody needs an Isaac to keep him in check.
Oh, God, having an Isaac is so fucking good.
We constantly need to be fact-checked.
Oh, man, imagine if the government had an Isaac. Federal Isaac now.
Yeah, every state needs a little Isaac, and then we need a federal Isaac. If people that don't know, Isaac is for all intents and purposes, our producer, does all of the back end stuff, puts together the show notes, does an amazing job of not only correlating all our bullshit, but making it readable and presentable. Imagine if the government had an Isaac for the rollout of Corona messaging. How much simpler that shit would be.
Just all these things flagged, like, here, what the fuck are you talking about? Here, you've just said some initials and you haven't explained anything, blah, blah, blah.
My only question, though, for Isaac is would he turn double agent for Nicola Gobbo?
100%.
Wait, wasn't Nicola Gobbo already a double agent? Just got this double agent chain. Quadruple agent.
Let's start with some good news this week. There's been a new investigation opened up into George Pell. It's so fucking good.
Somebody saw him get out of prison and was just like, hold on a second. Isn't he a pedo?
Yeah, he just did the revolving door, like out of prison back into the court to answer some more questions. Reporting over at The Guardian, police investigating George Pell over fresh child sexual abuse allegations from his time in the 1970s when he was a priest in Ballarat. If this is your first episode, go back to last week and you can listen to us talk for quite a while about how George Pell is very likely guilty of a whole bunch of shit, mainly because when he was a priest and then when he was later promoted through the church in Ballarat, the area that he was sort of overseeing just was very similar in how it dealt with abuse allegations and also just like not abuse allegations, but like those wink, wink, nudge, nudge, open secret allegations. Whereas like, oh yeah, everyone knows he's a bit of a creep, but we'll just move him to this other parish. We'll move him to another sector. We'll shuffle people around so no one's ever in one spot for too long.
That's the status quo for the entire Catholic Church, though. That's how their standard of dealing with abuse is just moving on priests to the next parish.
Oh, 100%. That's what I'm saying. Ballarat looks an awful lot like all the places in Ireland, all the places in England, all the places in South America where that exact same thing was happening. Now, obviously...
Weird. It's like there's a structural problem.
No, I'm not sure. Look, correlation doesn't equal causation, so who can say? But I sure hope this fresh child sexual abuse allegation also manages to convict George Pell and then have his jury conviction squashed by 3 old people on the High Court. That'd be great.
Do we know if he's still in the country, though? Like, I know he gave that exclusive interview with Andrew Bolt. Good God.
That interview was just I didn't like watch or listen to, or, whatever, but just the idea that he's like, all right, finally I can tell my side of the story, when they were like, hey, George Pell, would you like to testify under oath? He's like, no, absolutely not.
Yeah, I'm too sick to appear in court. I'm fine to go on Sky News though. So I'll be doing that. But yeah, like the idea of like, finally I can tell my side of the story. What's your side of the story? Didn't do it. Nothing to talk about.
It just shits me. It shits me as multiple people have pointed out in the last couple of weeks, is that any sort of like depiction of him by the right-wing media like The Australian or The Spectator or anything, or Andrew Bolt, is always in the context of he's innocent, as opposed to the actual judgment, which is basically that it doesn't meet the standards of evidence necessary required. It's not actually saying that he's innocent. Those are two separate things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he was not exonerated. He was, the sentence was overturned because there was still, the High Court ruled, a reasonable doubt,
yes.
Which is like, look, whatever. Like, just if I'm just saying, if you have like an identical twin, just make sure that the identical twin doesn't have an alibi and do a murder, and you will be fine, because you can just both go like, it was the other guy, and then like, maybe it was, like every other sort of piece of evidence, whatever. You can be sure that the High Court will overturn it because, maybe.
Who knows?
It was the High Court equivalent of who can say.
Yeah, the jury was like, we listened to all the evidence and, he did it. And the High Court was like, look, we recognize that you looked at all the evidence and you concluded that he did it, but we don't think that you considered the fact that maybe he didn't.
Okay, this is my legal hot take. I haven't made one on this podcast in a while, and I'm fully aware that I'll probably get kicked out of some sort of legal professional society for this. But my hot take...
Just your LinkedIn group will kick you out.
The Legal Professional Society for the Defense of Pedophiles.
Is like just with my belief in that defamation law in Australia only exists to serve the wealthy and the powerful. In exactly the same way, I think the tier of the court system in Australia is unjustly weighted towards the wealthy and the powerful, because you think of all the people who can go all the way to the top, to the High Court, to have their case heard, and then in the case of George Bell, eventually exonerated. It shits me. It's just so, It's so frustrating that it's very few people who can't afford it get all the way there. And even then, they need to have so much help and support and like fundraising because nobody else can.
Yeah, the guy that like the Murdoch press, the guy that dared to ask questions on Q&A that were critical of the Liberal Party, who was then hounded for like the better part of a fortnight from the Murdoch press, front page papers.
Oh, Duncan Storer.
Yeah, this dole bludger who dared blah blah blah. He could have potentially tried at least to sue for defamation of some sort, but there's no way he could afford to do that. But third highest person in the Catholic Church, fill your boots. Let's do another appeal. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, fuck him. I hope he rots in the hell that he thinks exists.
I hope for his sake that it's real.
I was just wondering before, like, has he, like, do we know if he's gone overseas yet? Because my full belief is that he's going to fuck off back to the Vatican the first opportunity that he can, and will probably die there because it takes like 3 years to, like, you know, have some sort of extradition order.
No, I reckon they will. They're gonna smuggle him out in an oversized Pope hat, and they're gonna put him on in the cargo of a plane and just send him overseas again. He's gonna come out. In continuing class war news, continuing wealth transfer under the guise of pandemic protection news. What have we got? The two biggest states have announced different versions of rent relief packages. Let's go state by state, I reckon.
Just these incredibly air quotes around rent relief, you know.
Oh, it's just... I mean,
we've done a thing that you could plausibly call rent relief.
Technically, they are providing the relief of rent for rent seekers and landlords. So, I mean, look, in a way.
It's such a shame that we don't have Lang on the pod today because he had such a good joke about it being the rent seeker payment.
Yep. We've got job
I've
seeker
now made, but
job seeker, job keeper, rent seeker. The rent seeker payment. So in New South Wales, the New South Wales state government has announced a combined $440 million for rent relief. That's split in half, so $220 to commercial, $220 to ostensibly tenants, but it is going directly to landlords who missed out on rent due to their tenants' lost income. Those renters will still owe the money at the end of it.
Yeah.
This is the thing we've been saying the entire time, though. Like, you know, whenever they announce things like freezes on evictions, like, that still means they can be evicted after this is over with, you know, $6,000 worth of debt or whatever. And that's going to go on their record because you just know that, like, the rental association has records on these kind of tenants as well.
Oh yeah. No, I'm gonna fucking get to that after we go through New South Wales and Vic. Holy shit, I got some Lang things to say about it.
It's also this situation where the New South Wales package is, we've announced $440 million due to rent relief because we can't have families worried about being evicted during this time of crisis. By the way, half of that's just for businesses. Like, that's such a separate thing of like, I'm worried that I won't have a home versus, you know, my business can't pay rent on the office or storefront or whatever. Like, sure, keeping businesses intact through the pandemic is important, but it's like a categorically different thing to humans need a home.
Security of life versus security of income.
Yeah, the fact that New South Wales has announced it as like, it's a $440 million rent relief package. Like, fuck you. It's like, it's a $220 million payout to landlords and that's it.
No one's going to die of exposure if you have to shutter your board game shop. Like that, it's a different type of rent. And the thing is as well, like when we're talking about rent like this, we do need to keep in mind that the structures still exist. I made this point a couple episodes back. When we're talking about rent for tenants, we're talking about the literal homes, the walls and the roofs that people need to live. but the building is still there. We're not talking about investments. In the same way, when you're talking about commercial rent, those businesses are still there. It's not like if you don't pay rent, they evaporate or dissolve. Like, that's not what rent was doing the entire time. The businesses are still there. It's a fucking null point. But something that does need to be clarified under the New South Wales program is that this $220 million to rental landlords or real estate agents, tenancy relief, is going to landlords if they miss out on rent from people who can't pay due to corona pandemic. Also, the renters will still owe the money they didn't pay. So it kind of sounds like landlords are double dipping.
Oh, that's bullshit.
If they get $2 because I can't pay them the $2 and then I still owe them the $2, that's $4 that they get when they only were owed $2 to begin with. So I'm just wondering how that's going to work out in the end of it. Oh, maybe it won't work out. Maybe that's exactly as it's supposed to go because it's a fucking wealth transfer. Who can say? I'm on the high court. Who can say?
This isn't acknowledging the fact that some some commercial tenancies have already offered the businesses relief. An example is I think the new JB Hi-Fi store that was going to open in the city, they've been offered a year's worth of free rent. A year. Gee, I wish my landlord would offer me a year worth of free rent. Just like that. So, like, okay, they've already proved on that level that the money doesn't exist for them.
And then shifting down south to the socialist utopia of Victoria, where Comrade Dan Andrews presides, he's announced a $500 million subsidy for landlords and tenants, with $420 million of that being tax breaks for landlords and $80 million being symbolic payments to renters that, again, goes immediately to landlords.
Fantastic.
Just fucking garbage.
Tax breaks this time. They're not even, they're going through another level of obfuscation to just like, as long as a renter doesn't see money, we're okay. Just draft up anything that you need so that we don't actually just give money to renters. That's the one thing that can't happen.
And even when it comes to giving money to renters, of course, like every sort of government grant or offer of relief, it's mean tested into oblivion. So you have to do all sorts of things just in the same way that renters were previously asked by their rental agencies to offer up proof of how they were spending their money, which is illegal, by the way. Just want to emphasize that. Even to apply for this rental relief payment, they still have to give an enormous amount of proof as to what their income is. And this is separate to Centrelink already. So just the burden of bureaucracy involved in getting the payment that you immediately need now before you get kicked out of your house is insane.
Yeah. So what happens with the Victorian one is that you have to show that you earn less than $100,000 a year and also have less than $5,000 in savings. And then if you can show that you've been mediating with your landlord and working together on it, then your landlord can get $2,000, up to $2,000 in rent that they missed out on. So you have to prove that you can't pay, then they get the money that you were going to give them anyway. And Dan Andrews actually quoted as saying that the money's going to landlords in the hope that they will then pass that on to renters. And there's some legal bullshit about how they have to demonstrate in a certain way that they've passed it on, blah, 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 blah. But his quote is that they want to encourage landlords to, quote, do the right thing by their tenants. And this payment is encouraging them to, quote, do the right thing, which, as Evie just pointed out, those same landlords and real estate agents were the ones sending out non-expert financial advice, which was illegal. And our next point that we'll get to, they're the same real estate agents that have a large Facebook group together where they snitch on tenants and share hints and tips about how to scare people into paying rent. Because
it's legally making people beg to keep their house. It's the same thing as it was before, like, Scott Morrison saying, we hope the landlords will do the right thing at the start before they even offered any rent relief payment. Except now they've just codified this into, you need to beg your landlord to have a settlement first before we give you any money.
Yeah, it's utter garbage. If you do have to get involved in some sort of negotiation with your landlord or real estate agent, definitely check out the each state has its own sort of tenancy advocacy group, and they're doing a lot of good work, just sort of like they're doing their best in trying to provide information which isn't legally binding, because renters have been totally left out in the fucking dark due to this shit, legally speaking. So there are a lot of advocacy groups. I think as well some of the unions are doing some good work in trying to help. Obviously, the Australian Unemployed Workers Union, big shout out to them every single week. But this is essentially going to require a united front. There are ads on TV at the moment. A friend of mine, I haven't seen one yet, a friend of mine sent me an all caps message the other day saying, there are calls on Channel 9 for a landlord union. Which is just fucking incredible.
Oh my God.
Just the most fucking lumpen bourgeoisie union.
It's all, like they recognize the power of a union.
Just the fuck, yeah, exactly.
I've got to suggest that when it's landlords unionizing, that's less of a landlords union and maybe more like a landlords cartel.
Yeah. The landlord mafia.
I think this might be a good time to give a shout out to one of our listeners who messaged us on Twitter. Sean, thanks for listening, by the way.
Thanks, Sean.
He's DM'd us to let us know that he's helping to organise a rent strike.
Oh, hey.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
shout out to Sean.
Yeah, this is something that we're all actually going to have to get involved in. Where, I mean, me personally, I'm going to start rolling out some stuff soon. I'm in talks with a few people. And essentially, like, I think all of us all the time working towards a rent strike, rent amnesty sort of thing is going to be necessary, because especially if landlords are unionizing, but even real estate agents have a business. So they're all under, like, you know, there's 6 landlords under the one business. The one business can have a united front, while renters, or at least individual homes, are like microcosms of the wider problem. They are their own small, like, atom that isn't in touch with everyone else, which is bullshit. So essentially, we do need a united renters front, essentially, because once the moratorium on evictions is up, a lot of us are potentially going to be fucked. So that could be the case, or the other outcome is we all band together and in 6 months' time with a united front go, absolutely fucking not. No. Deal with it. So that's my hope. If you are organising any sort of rent strike, if you're organising any sort of rent amnesty, if you're just trying to find ways to get renters in touch with each other, get in touch with us as well. We're going to be putting that out there more and more in the coming weeks.
In the article about the fellow who found the real estate agents Facebook group, the what's his name? Leo Ross, who's a representative of the tenants union, just made this really interesting point that was the government's moratorium on evictions also threw out the actual landlords into the cold as well. Like them just being like, sort it out with your tenants, just no evictions. If the government's not offering like even any advice for how to deal with that, that's like doubly useless. Like not to empathize with landlords and real estates here, but like this is like just such transparently shit policy to just be like, I'll work it out. That's madness.
Yeah. That one thing that you require of your or the one punishment that you can give renters if they break the terms of the contract, we can't do that for now. All the rest of it, I don't know. Well, it'll be fine. Figure it out.
Just work it out. You've spent the last 10 years terrorizing this person. Just be friends for a bit.
And lastly, in the ongoing class war, Centre Alliance MP Rebecca Sharkey is already seeing evidence that JobKeeper is being abused by employers.
And so did Josh Borenstein, who's one of the principals at Morris Blackburn. He has already started to receive clients who are having the JobKeeper payment abused by employers. So it's starting.
That's really good. So Rebecca Sharkey was tweeting about this the other day. What did she say? She said, an employee let go 3 weeks ago was contacted by former employer, today offering JobKeeper, but only if she gives them $600 of her payment. She refused, and the employer is no longer willing to file paperwork. Like, just the employer just being like, oh, you're getting the JobKeeper payment. Maybe we should be getting the JobKeeper payment.
This is the exact fucking thing that I was talking about. I'm sick of talking to people about how it's actually pretty good policy and it's actually what we need. It's a wealth transfer. There is absolutely nothing to stop that employer at the moment from doing that sort of thing. If they file the paperwork, then there is ostensibly some laws in place that will stop them from screwing over workers. That will essentially be a tax issue, though, which I don't trust them to handle very well at all. But even then, like, what is the follow-up on this sort of thing? That is a workplace negotiation.
Yeah.
At every fucking level of this rollout, Lang said it best a couple of weeks ago. The smallest economic measurement that this government has is the small business. Things below that, like the self-employed, workers, the unemployed, do not factor into this sort of shit at all. It's all about the businesses. It's all about keeping the economy rolling. And it's all about essentially like enriching their own portfolios and the portfolios of their friends. They can't see anything else outside of that. And it's disgusting.
I have a pet theory about the way that the Rentseeker and JobKeeper payments are being rolled out, which is like every payment that's like, okay, so here's some people that we've identified that are having a problem. This is like freshly unemployed workers or, renters who are unable to make rent. That's it. Like, how do we help these people? We need to give them money. So we're going to set up this thing that gives money to the landlord that they can pass on to the renter, or sets up a thing to give money to the employer that they can pass on to the employee. There's always just this system where the government's just like, all right, we need to get money to someone. So the very first thing that we think of is go through a middleman, because we're all wealthy lawyers, and the first thing that we think of is how do you make a payment is funnel it through the Cayman Islands. Like, you need a middleman. That's how you get money to someone.
Yeah. I think part of it's probably as well the... Like some of them at least have the mindset of like, well, I'm in the government, but I don't trust the government at all. So private businesses can work this out better. So it'll go through the middleman. It'll keep everything afloat.
Mitch, that's everyone in the IPA who's ever come into the government. They don't trust the government, but they want to join the government so they can dismantle everything that is government run. Because
things will work better. Yeah, things will work better if they do. Except for all the times that they don't, but that's only because we haven't dismantled it enough yet, which, all credit to them, is the same argument that socialists make when they're like, nah, it's not really a socialist country. I mean, it's true. We do not yet know what an entirely free market economy looks like, because it's always had that pesky regulation in place. So you know what? Maybe they've got a point.
That's with the exception of all the seasteads that some libertarians have set up where everything just descends into absolute...
It descends into racism on the first day. Yeah, it goes to racism on the first day, and then the moderator closes it down on the third day every time.
The government's making an app.
Why was that funny?
Fuck apps. I am so tired of apps.
It's like Uber, but for a pandemic.
Why must we need an app for fucking everything? I'm so tired of this world and all its apps.
So the federal government wants to roll out a contact tracing app, essentially just logging via Bluetooth is the hope, where you go if you interact with people for more than 15 minutes or so, and then if it turns out, unfortunately, you get diagnosed with COVID-19, they can look at the file that's totally encrypted and totally good, not a risk at all, and then they can essentially see who you've been in contact with, who you might have been exposed to, who might have given it to you, blah, 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 blah,
yeah,
blah, blah.
The sort of the bare sort of details of it. So that the model that a lot of them seem to be working off is the Singaporean government app called Trace Together, which was actually pretty clever. It used some sort of funky encryption techniques so that it wasn't actually giving out like your phone number or the identities of people that you're hanging out with. It was all sort of carefully hidden behind like mathematical tricks so that the only real detail that was given out is who you'd hung out with, but not who, just like, no, there's a terrible explanation.
It would essentially,
it's complicated, but it wasn't like a terrible like privacy breach or anything.
Was it
like,
de-identified enough?
It was de-identified. Basically, your phone was just exchanging random numbers with other people's phones.
Right.
And when you got diagnosed with corona, the hospital would have a list of all the random numbers that your phone sent out, and it would broadcast to all the other phones. If you've received this random number, it means that you're an infection risk and you should self-isolate.
Okay.
So it wasn't like, oh, like Evie's been hanging out with Mitch, so we're going to message Mitch to say you're infection risk. Like they didn't even have that level of information.
Okay.
So from a privacy perspective and from a security perspective, as far as I know, and I'm not a security professional, but as far as I know, it seemed okay. And that's as far as I'm willing to go because I'm not a security professional and if you're talking about IT security, you could only ever listen to actual security professionals, and everybody else genuinely never knows what the fuck they're talking about. As soon as someone says, I guarantee it's safe, you just ignore that person on that topic forever. Because
this is something that Australia has struggled with in terms of data collection in the last 10 years, is that every sort of large-scale data collection exercise has suffered because somehow Australian state and federal governments have really dropped the ball on de-identifying information or have not proven that they can do it. We've had various failures in the census, in my key collection data. There's and people have proven, yes, medical records. They've proven that they can connect the information points to actually identify where that data has come from.
It's because IT security, I really can't stress this enough. IT security is incredibly complicated and insanely fucking hard. Like, the whole place is just an arms race between hackers and people who don't want their data, breached. And that arms race has only been accelerating, and it has been going on for decades. So, it's insanely complicated. And politicians don't appreciate that it's insanely complicated. They're like, oh, how hard can it be? Put it in a safe. And the people who are selling them these technologies, because always this is outsourced, always this is going to consultants, the consultants are salespeople. And so the politician is like, can we make this secure? And the salesperson is like, yes. And then they take it back to a security engineer at their consultancy, and the security engineer is just like, oh, fuck, you told them we could do what? And they're like, well, yeah, give it a go. And then, fast forward 2 months, shit gets cracked, and they're like, oh, we still guarantee that it was, secure. It must have been some state level actor. It's just that it's people covering their own asses, refusing to admit that they're wrong, and just failing to appreciate that they're trying to solve something that's actually complicated, and it doesn't go away just by throwing a bunch of money at it.
Yeah.
This is also like Stuart Robert, friend of the show, who is he is the Minister for Government Services. I say. So this app in particular is being sort of helmed by Stuart Robert. Obviously, he's not the sort of lead of the programming team that is, assembling this thing, but he is the main sort of spokesperson for what it's going on, like what it's doing, and he's already got basic facts about it wrong. In the first time he spoke about it, he's like, yeah, it gives out your phone number, and
he's the Minister for Government Services, and he doesn't know what the app will do that traces people's connections with each other and communications with each other. What the fuck?
He doesn't know what it will do because it's a genuinely complicated thing, but these fucking just bastards in the government don't appreciate that things are more complex than they can handle. And so somebody will explain something, he's like, yeah, technical jibber jabber, whatever. And then he'll get up on the television and he'll be like, yeah, and it sends your phone number to blah, 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 just with perfect confidence because he's like, I'm smart. And
I wouldn't be here if I wasn't smart.
He's not. And this is just a classic case every time we're deploying some kind of technology, and specifically with Stuart Robert, where Centrelink, the website will go down and he'll be like, oh yeah, we were attacked by a distributed denial of service attack, which is somebody in his tech department saying oh yeah, maybe it was a distributed denial of service attack. Maybe it's just the service couldn't handle it, sort of thing. And, he hears 5 cents worth of dollars of information and he goes up on TV and he just sort of, overspends and he's always wrong because he shouldn't be making that kind of statement. He should say, and to speak about the technical details of the app, here is a lead developer or, somebody who knows what the fuck they're talking about. Because he's always going on and he's always shooting off his mouth about stuff that is just totally incorrect.
On the attack front, I actually reckon that he thought it was a DDoS attack because he has a cousin or a relative who is really someone wanted to troll him, and then his super, he thinks he's super tech savvy mid-20s cousin was like, oh, it was probably a DDoS attack, and he's like, oh, probably was. I'm very smart and I should be in charge of this stuff.
There's one really important thing to address about it, because I have had a couple of people message me already being like, what's your take on the app? Because I'm fairly tech savvy. And my take on the app is this: nobody knows. The government has sort of flip-flopped over the actual details of the information. Every single time that they've released some details about it, it's contradicted something that they've said previously. So there's genuinely no real information to work off. If they're basing it off the Singaporean app, the director of the department that developed the Singaporean app was asked, is this app capable of replacing manual contact tracing? And the director of the department said, without qualification, no. Direct quote. He said, without qualification, no. It's like the guy who made it, the guy who headed that development doesn't think it will work. And so we can assume that if the government is going to go with the Singaporean app, they've already fucked up. And if they're developing their own thing, they're going to fuck it up. And we can tell they're going to fuck it up because they don't have any idea what they're talking about, and they're going to outsource it to the person who makes the best sales pitch rather than the person who's most capable of developing it. They will charge the government, $2.5 million. They'll spit something out. It'll be garbage. Like, my take on the app is I don't think anybody's privacy is going to get breached. I just think the whole thing's going to consistently fall over and get everything wrong and fail.
Yeah. But luckily for us, they have now announced, after flip-flopping the entire week, they have announced that at least today, the tracing app will be voluntary. There was some talk that it might actually be a mandatory thing because we have to get everyone tracing, but they're now going to say,
oh yeah, now Scott Morrison just musing, maybe I'll make it mandatory.
Yeah, just like with his little smirk, being like, oh, I'm not gonna bloody rule it out.
Maybe I'll have a little bit of a taste of fascism in this department as well. It's always a delicious little treat for me.
But no, it is going to be voluntary, which is good because some federal ministers, like Barnaby Joyce or the Deputy Speaker, Lou O'Brien, have said that there is a, quote, snowball's chance in hell that they're going to use it. So federal ministers are publicly stating that they themselves will not be downloading this app, which should tell you everything you need to know about whether or not you should use the app. Yes, you should. Do your civic duty. It's very important.
Yeah, it's important that you use the app or not. It's going to be a clusterfuck anyway. Who cares?
Don't use the app. Don't use it. There's also just a quick shout out on Twitter. A cryptographer, Vanessa Teague, has reason to believe that the app could be used to track more than just contact tracing. It could be tracking a whole bunch of different info. Again, like Tom said, because we don't fucking know what it's actually going to be in it.
Vanessa Teague's great. She is a security researcher, and she has a healthy skepticism of government initiatives. So she usually communicates the science in a fairly technical sort of sense, but she's a pretty good person to follow if you're interested in the sort of the nitty-gritty of this sort of thing.
Righty.
Yep.
In mind-bending Corona news. This is the fucking most insane thing I've heard in such a long time. Apparently there's some figures out that suggest that more people than this time last year are currently booking cruise ships.
See, I don't trust that on face value. I don't. It's come from a cruise ship blog.
Oh, it's from a cruise ship blog.
I do. I 100% believe it.
This is big cruise ship trying to put out the propaganda that people are buying cruise ship tickets.
It's from Business Insider, actually. Business Insider Australia.
No, but they quoted the cruise ship blog.
They wouldn't be just repeating nonsense.
Not Business Insider.
So apparently the LA Times cited a poll of 4,600 cruise customers conducted by a review site, cruisecritic.com, in which 75% of respondents said they plan to continue to book cruises at the same rate as before the coronavirus, compared to 24% who said they plan to book less often. I mean, I would 100% believe this.
The group of people surveyed was people who were going on cruise ships already.
Yep.
So it's not new, like we surveyed a group of 1,400 idiots.
Look, people who catch cruise ships already we know they're stupid, okay? Like people get murdered and like get diseases on cruise ships all the time. And
but there's a buffet.
Like this isn't going to stop them.
No, I would 100% believe that more people are booking cruises because like just the mentality of being like, well, after this, it's going to be safer than ever and it's going to be cheaper. Like that's the mentality of people who want to go on cruise ships already is that type of like, oh, well, what's the cheap option for this holiday? It's like, well, it's going to be even better now.
There's a thing that genuinely like fucks me up about this. And this is not even about cruise ship specific things, but let's assume that everybody does okay. Coronavirus is dealt with. We can all lift lockdown. Everybody's outside. Economy recovers, blah, blah, blah. Nothing prevents another outbreak. Like, immunity to corona is only immunity to that one. And if another one happens in 5 weeks,
There's already 3 different strains.
it just starts again. Like, there's not like, oh, well, we got better from the idea of a pandemic, and so now we're immune to pandemics for a while. No, it's this one, and then we're exactly as resilient to a pandemic as we were in November 2019. There's no like actual unless there's like actual structural change to like I guess we're a little bit more immune because we know that like social distancing works and they don't have to explain that concept from scratch again. But like the any mentality of like, oh, and then once corona's dealt with, done, and we don't have another pandemic for another 100 years. Absolutely not.
But this is the continual misunderstanding of what immunity is. Like, this is something, now this is something that's been going on for at least the last 25 years since we've had SARS and we've had a bunch of other, significant outbreaks in the last 25 years. But not since polio, not since measles has there been something that has wiped out quite so many people and needing a vaccine immediately. So there has been an entire generation, maybe 2 generations of people in the Western world who don't understand the impact of vaccines and
well, I mean, that's the whole anti-vax movement, right?
Exactly. That's the lead up. It's basically the birth of the anti-vaxxer movement is because all these people don't have the lived experience of being in that situation where they know how vaccines save lives. Like, so my background is from India and Pakistan. So I know firsthand that having the polio vaccine has saved lives. And like, polio is eradicated in India as a result of the vaccine. And like, because people don't have that lived experience, this is how the ignorance is born. And so now you have all these people who are like, well, if we have like a couple of parties and a couple of people get sick, we'll all become immune to it eventually. No, you're not going anywhere until people have a vaccine for coronavirus. And even then, there's the strains have already multiplied at least 3 times. I don't know whether that's confirmed yet, but I think there's been tests to see how it's diversified in different countries. And that's going to keep on happening.
Yeah, my understanding is there's distinct strains, but there's not evidence that immunity to one strain doesn't carry over. So it's like, yes, it's mutating, but of course it's mutating.
That's the nature of
the nature of the virus.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a sort of deal breaker thing to worry about yet.
When you're talking about anti-vax stuff, you don't need to have facts. They already seeded that ground. It's fine.
That's the thing that every now and then I see these wild takes from anti-vax people about corona being, or even other things where they're just like, I don't know about a vaccine, but maybe there's a way to get like a little bit of the virus that's in a safe way, and then that like lets you develop the immunity. It's like, yeah, bro.
What do you think a vaccine is?
If you have a small viral load to start with, it just won't hit as hard, and then your body's good to go. But I don't want autism.
It's like those constant tweets where you're just like, yeah, congratulations, you've invented a vaccine.
Yeah, it's so good.
So let's talk about the Ruby Princess.
A crime plague ship.
Again.
Yeah.
The crime
criminal,
plague ship.
No,
the ship full of criminals. Which one of them did it? Which one of them brought us the virus? Who's to blame? We'll get to the bottom of this. Was it Border Force? No. Was it New South Wales? No. It was one of those bloody passengers that brought the virus to our shores, and we'll hunt them down.
Look, I made a joke about this on Twitter the other day that I was like, I'd love to know who's responsible for everything that's happened with the Ruby Princess now, rather than waiting for like 10 years until we get a true crime podcast about it. But I feel like now with like the criminal investigation happening, and there's probably going to be a royal commission as well, because there's a royal commission for everything these days.
Well, it's the best way to delay the outcome of a finding.
They'll have the appearance of doing something about it, but we definitely won't hear anything for at least another few years.
Yeah, so the actual development there is the criminal investigation into who's at fault for letting the Ruby Princess dock seems to have kind of morphed into this who's at fault for bringing the virus onto the cruise ship, because the federal police have said that they're interviewing every single passenger on the ship if they need to, and they have started interviewing passengers. And it's like, how does a passenger even know who authorized the ship to disembark.
So what they're doing is trying to figure out. There was reporting done on the Signal, ABC's daily podcast. They're talking to passengers to try to figure out what they were told by the captain and the staff and the heads of Ruby Princess and the Princess group, the cruise line group, because there's reports that seem to suggest that while they were tootling around the oceans and going to different docks, they had people on board that were really, really sick and showing an awful lot of symptoms of COVID, and the reports were, no, we have no cases on board. Nah, we got them tested and there's no one with COVID on board. And the captain and the administrators of the cruise group kept telling ports and authorities that they had no cases on board.
So it's a case of who did the cover up.
Essentially, yeah. So now they're looking at like why were they allowed to dock when that happened? What the government officials are saying now is like, well, because Ruby Princess told us they had no one on board that had issues. It's like, well, did you test them?
Oh,
well, we asked them
please.
like a bunch of times.
A cruise ship company wouldn't lie to us.
So the New South Wales government has created a special commission of inquiry, which is just such a strong term. Oh, we're going to get to the bottom of this. It's headed
like a
up.
royal commission, but the Queen's not involved.
Yeah,
that's the only difference.
It's like a royal commission, but we don't keep texting the Queen about like updates on it. Like, oh my god, did you hear about this?
It's
this
a
is
group
wild.
chat with the Queen.
It's being headed up by Brett Walker QC. Whose recent hits include successfully appealing Pell's conviction to the High Court. He once also represented the tobacco industry in the fight against plain packaging legislation. So I trust this guy to get to the bottom of the cruise ship debacle.
I just want to intervene in terms of like when it comes to lawyers who like defend certain kinds of clients. I personally think that you shouldn't necessarily have like a moral judgment of a lawyer who chooses who they want to defend. But if you have a certain number of cases where you're always defending the bad guy, I think you can be deemed morally bankrupt in that way. Not a legal opinion in that, but yeah.
At a certain point, like you've just got to take on like a feel-good case. Like you've just got to like cleanse the palate with like a small Greens group wants to get they want to be allowed to plant trees in a public park, and you take on that case and you take on a local council and win. You don't just keep going from like tobacco industry to George Pell.
The term I've used for people who have like careers in like the tobacco industry or forest and mining, like I call that professionally evil. And yeah, like this guy seems to have a history of being professionally evil.
Just reading an article from the Sydney Morning Herald here, and he commands fees in order of $25,000 a day.
Oh my god!
Right.
He represented former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and the Royal Commission into the Home Insulation Program, successfully arguing that long-standing cabinet secrecy rules be overturned and Rudd be allowed to give his evidence in full. That's pretty good. Walker was one of the leading counsels in tobacco companies' ultimately unsuccessful fight against the Gillard government. Not very good. And he's represented...
We're just going down this guy's career being like, good, bad, good.
And he... Wait. He's represented the Finks Motorcycle Club in its fight against the validity of South Australia's anti-bikie laws, and I don't know who the good guy is in that.
That's mad, though, that he pulls $25K a day. Like, mate, you don't have to work.
What the fuck?
And so he's easily wealthy enough to retire, right?
Yeah.
And then someone's like, mate, Brett, George Pell, someone's got to get him out of prison. And he's like,
I'm on it.
I'm getting out of bed for this. Like,
yeah. I mean,
fucking why? Stay at home.
I don't know what to make of this dude. In 2017, Walker was hired by then Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce to defend Joyce's political career amid dual citizenship claims. I don't know what to make of this guy. This guy is an enigma. He's our Batman. Dude, yeah. QC's Rock 2020. Anyway.
Oh boy.
So,
He's just, I mean, this guy it's pretty cool because he clearly doesn't really have any sort of moral like attachment to anything that he does. And I, as somebody who works in tech, am really just like, it delights me to see an artificial intelligence working at that level of sophistication.
And to cap off Ruby Princess news, Tasmania at the beginning of last week had a spike and had more strict lockdown conditions put on the northwestern area of the state, most likely because of the Ruby Princess. A bunch of passengers came from the Ruby Princess, came through, and then in one day they had over 40 cases. Just to keep in mind, the Ruby Princess has been linked to more than 700 cases and more than 18 deaths in Australia.
In any other circumstance, it would be a national scandal that would go on for a very long time. And I mean, you'd hope it would go on, like, you know, the attention would continue to be paid for it. But I mean, some sort of a national crisis that would be a scandal in any other time happens every few weeks now. So
in entirely unrelated news, there's been confirmation that Border Force let Ovation of the Seas plague ship dock that had 13 sick passengers at the time. It's not related at all to the last story.
Cool. So whose politicians' mum and dad were on that ship?
So the Ovation of the Seas is just another plague ship that, while we're all talking about the Ruby Princess, that one was also going on, and that one also had, 98 passengers have since tested positive for COVID. One of them has died. Apparently, at the time of docking, they had 16 visibly sick passengers. And this one really does seem to be a slam dunk Border Force. It's their fault situation. There was a crew announcement that was reported when they were docking that stated, in conference with ABF or the Australian Border Force today, we have the confirmation that none of our guests will be required to self-isolate or anything of that sort. That's the direct quote there. Anything of that, none of that silly isolation, quarantine nonsense for you cruise passengers. You paid for your ticket and you're allowed to go home. And if you're patient zero for a cluster of infections that wipes out a whole bunch of people, well, it's all good. Don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. The plague's a myth anyway. And we all know that it's a myth, don't we? Because everyone's bloody saying, let's reopen the economy. It's time. The virus hasn't gone away. We don't have a vaccine, but let's everybody get to work. Let's go and have parties again, because come on, we got to live.
It's just... So, I mean, that's been something, if you are in any way connected to international politics, you definitely would have been seeing all of the stuff coming out of America, of just the utterly insane, sometimes old people have to die so the economy can keep going, and it's everyone's freedom of choice, and that's not a fringe idea. There's been so many protests in the state in the last week. We won't go into it, but Jesus Christ.
Some of those protests are so crazy. I've seen people carrying signs that liberate us as liberate us in this instance means let us go back to work. That's
so
mate, that's
it's
not
interesting
liberation.
To see this talking point being every conservative talking point gets shipped over to Australia at some point, but it's interesting to see this particular one coming over here now, because Australia, just by sheer dumb luck and the virtue of being an island, has managed to get away with not having hundreds of thousands of people die. Otherwise, we definitely would have gone the same way as America. But now we've got people like Chris Ullman.
Enemy of the show, Chris Ullman. He's Channel 9's political editor, wrote an opinion piece saying, if a grandparent chooses a loving embrace that may kill them, who are we to stop them?
Oh. That's it, Nana, you're off.
Which is bonkers.
Bye-bye.
That is also, it's worth pointing out that Chris Ullman founded an anti-euthanasia political party some years ago. So it's
Christ,
you've really done a 180 there, huh?
Dude, stand up for your beliefs and killing off Nan.
And this is just the thing. So Chris Ullman, Channel 9's political editor, had the headline that Tom just said. Then we had Lee Sales, a reporter from the ABC, retweet that with this whole Chris Ullman asking the big questions about this.
Oh, Lee Sales is one of those people who uncritically retweet all this absolute shit. We've got to listen to both sides.
This one at least had the thought. No, this one was at least a retweet with comment. She thought about at least what to say. The idea that Chris Ullman is asking these really deep philosophical questions. They require some of the most intense rumination. Who are we to stop Nan if our hug could kill him? So what the fuck are you talking about? Shut the fuck up, self-isolate. Yeah. Maybe give it 12 months and we'll probably be right. The fuck?
It's a stupid talk. It's a stupid thought. poorly thought out, and they're both like, wow, really tackling the difficult topics. He wasn't even tackling it. He opened with, the answer is yes.
And the thing is, like, lots of people were like replying to Lee Sales and saying, hey, like, this is a terrible article. You should feel bad for like even considering the point. And she's like, did you read the whole article? Like the headline that that she said was allegedly misconstruing his argument is literally in the body of the article. Like there's no misconstruing his thought.
This is an opinion that I have about Twitter where they're like, you only read the headline. You got to read the whole article. Like, one, mate, you only tweeted the headline. Like, I'm not taking you out of context here. You are. Like, if you're just tweeting the headline, that's what you've said. And if you're like, oh, well, buy my book if you want to hear my whole opinion on it. Like, no, I'm just going to take what you just said and treat it as though you just said that, because that's what happened.
That's the entire context.
If the political editor is saying, well, actually, you should read the whole article because the whole article is something different to the headline.
Oh, yeah, he's the fucking political editor.
Then you've fucked up on the headline then. Or
write a better headline, you dumbass.
Or you're tacitly admitting that the headline is bait. And in that case, we shouldn't read your article anyway because you've just written it for clicks, for views. And in these trying times in the economy, I understand that. But also, fuck you.
That's the thing when he's like, read the article. That's his business, is us going to the article. Hey, you think I said something really fucking stupid, but actually you should give me $1. Had you thought about that?
Also, as Evie pointed out, Sam Lovick, an AFR contributor, said that the next stage must be to let the virus spread, which I don't reckon the next stage is that. I reckon the next stage is still locking down and making sure the virus doesn't spread, and I'm only basing that off of the advice of literally every other economist or health professional I've ever seen on a 30-second clip retweeted on YouTube.
This is the thing we were talking about just before. There's no immunity until there's a vaccine. Once again, it's just massively, like, in this case, it's not misunderstanding for the purposes of, oh, duh, I don't get science. I think in this case, he's misunderstanding for the purposes of misinformation.
That's it. The next stage must be to let the virus spread. Is like, what's the logic behind that? Like, well, humans have had a turn not letting the virus spread. Now let's let the virus have a go. Let's see how that goes.
Let the virus. If the virus has a go, it gets a go.
I mean, if we all stayed locked down, aren't we the real bad guys here? Give the virus a chance.
If we lock down, the virus wins.
Yeah.
And if we go out again and catch the virus and it kills us, then we win. We win because we were free to go to a pub.
But at what
Take
cost?
that politically aligned pandemic.
That's what the virus wants, is for us to stay inside.
It's literally not. It exists because we don't. Fuck off. Anyway, God damn it.
Sam Lovick accepting a contract from the virus to like ghostwrite an opinion piece here.
To have Lee Sales retweet it with a big fucking, it's an interesting point. Maybe we should give it more hosts.
Yeah. Oh, the virus really tackling some interesting questions about whether we should go outside or not. Great stuff from Sam Lovick here.
Should you tongue kiss everyone you meet? Yes. This coronavirus makes some awful good points. Maybe we should consider them. In the interest of fairness and balance, we should consider the coronavirus perspective in all of this.
Maybe that's a cultural front that we can win, this tongue-kissing idea, is if we somehow sort of like portray going outside and spreading the virus as like slutty, then people are like, no. In closing, talking about coronavirus stuff, there's one tiny last little bit of information. It's not even news, it's just information, which is the next Hillsong conference is on July 7 through 10. And I'm just going to say, if you wanted to make a bet about when the lockdown would be lifted by, maybe that's a good one. July 7. Just like, you don't even need to say Hillsong conference or anything. Just like when you're talking with your friends, just be like, my bet's on July 7. And then when the Hillsong conference rolls around and the lockdown's lifted to make sure that ScoMo can go to church, you can be like,
genius.
Check it out. I was right.
You know what, though?
Like, it's just a freebie from Not Good Enough. July 7.
Is Sportsbet got a bet on it?
Yeah, I reckon. Here's what you do: if you want to make a pretty safe bet, just say you reckon that the lockdown's going to be lifted July 7th. If you want to make a killing on something that's a little bit more out of the realm of possibility, but still a pretty good bet, I reckon the lockdown will come back into effect on July 11th. Oh, we lifted it too soon.
And
who could have known?
Just as a praxis note, make private bets with your friends. Because if you lose those bets, you're not just making a large donation to Sportsbet otherwise. Let's talk about the environment. And Lang's not here today, so we can say anything and there's nobody to correct us.
You know what? Just as a secret, I fucking love gas. I love my gas.
The environment's bad.
Do you love fracking so much you could kiss it?
Yes, queen. I'm a RuPaul.
Don't kiss fracking, Mitch. You'll give it the virus.
And we need fracking to keep the economy going. So in
environment news today, fracking caught COVID.
All right. In the best environment news, it's turning into a serial on our podcast. The Energy Minister, Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor, he's back.
Oh,
he's
good
back,
job,
baby.
Angus.
He's doing it again.
Love to see him.
Angus Taylor, just perpetually corruption scandal riddled. Angus Taylor is this time caught up in something called the Underwriting New Generation Investment Scheme. It's a program being rolled out by the federal government, ostensibly to help it. In the quotes, it is a federal government program for which there appears to exist no constitutional or legislative authority, which has no established guidelines for assessing projects and an opaque process for allocating millions of taxpayer dollars.
What's that quote from?
The Saturday Paper, who regularly get called out, shouted out on this show. They have the 7 a.m. podcast. They do some really great investigative journalism. So on the 7 a.m. podcast, this is entirely from that podcast. It fucking blew my mind. You really should go and just subscribe to it. Every day they've got some good shit. But so this scheme is ostensibly trying to help the environment, and it's called the Underwriting New Generation Investment, because what it's supposed to do is help out all these new programs that are coming forward. New programs like upgrading a coal power plant in Vales Point, New South Wales, that was sold by the New South Wales government in 2015 for $1 million.
Okay.
Yeah. And then revalued in 2017 at $700 million.
Wow.
It sold for $1 million and then was revalued at $700 million by its new owner, who we'll get into in a second. But what I do love is that an owner can buy something and then just reevaluate it themselves. They say, oh, look, energy prices are going up. I reckon I'm now worth $699 million more than I was 2 years ago.
But this is the thing about valuation. This is like, okay, have you ever seen an episode of Dragon's Den or like Shark Tank or one of those things? So ultimate capitalist enjoyment, by the way. But one of the things that's really funny to watch whenever a new business comes in asking for money from all these investors is that they come in and they say, my business is worth $300,000. It's been open for 3 weeks. And like, so what's that valuation based on? It's based on potential future income. But most of the time, like I would say like 90% of the time on that show, they're pulling that valuation completely out of their ass. They're just like, everyone's going to get my teaspoon that also doubles as a can opener. And it's going to be worth so many millions of dollars because everyone needs a teaspoon that doubles as a can opener, right?
Well, I mean, I have a
So, like,
teaspoon and I have a can opener, but I don't have one thing. That's pretty good.
So here we are, like, these new owners of this coal plant is like, well, we're going to get all this is going to be worth X number of like millions of dollars in the next a couple of years. So therefore it's worth that much. They just pulled a number completely out of thin air.
Also, like, pretty galling because they only just paid $1 million for it recently. So they're like, we value this at $1 million. And now that we have it, we would have paid $700 million for it. That's how much it's really worth. Like, oh, good on you, New South Wales government. We're good at the economy. Like, I'm not sure that's true.
So I mean, it might shock you guys to see that there are some links here between the people that bought that coal power plant and the Liberal government, which is super weird. That was bought by Delta Energy. The chairman of which is one Trevor Charles St. Barker,
Again,
which is just the whitest
extremely
chairman
fake.
name. Just
Not a real name.
he's one of the biggest political donors in the country, with the vast majority of his donations going to the Liberal and the National Party. And he's known as an advocate for coal, which is super weird because that's the position his jobs are in. Like his industry is the coal industry. It's like, yeah, I'm an advocate for podcasts. Yes. So that's just one of the things. So just to circle back to make the big point, Angus Taylor is overseeing a program called the Underwriting New Generation Investment. One of those things that they're helping out with is the coal power plant that went up by hundreds of millions of dollars, owned by a Liberal donor.
Oh, so the coal power plant's valued at $700 million, but the Underwriting New Generation Investment is going to give them more money to upgrade it.
Going to help with it's going to help with upgrades to that coal power plant because they're valued at so much. It is essentially going to be sports rort again. It's going to be an energy rort. It's going to be the environment rort. It is, I'm not saying this definitively, it is Angus Taylor helping people who help the Liberal Party. Which again, if you look at any single interview ever over any amount of time, if you ask a politician what is the point of lobbyists and donors, they will tell you, it's just because they love the democratic process and they love just helping out democracy. Like, so do they get any special favours from it? No, not at all. We are entirely impartial.
Oh, no, we'd never translate that into a special favour.
It's fucked. So anyway, the Australian Institute has referred all of this to the Federal Auditor General seeking an investigation. That the Federal Auditor General, his office is the one that actually exposed the sports rort scandal. So I'm not hopeful that something will be done about it, but I am kind of hopeful that we'll actually hear about all the bullshit that's been happening.
More environment news. So an independent report has come out by the Parliamentary Budget Office of Victoria, concluding that ending logging in Victoria now, rather than phasing it out over the next decade, which is the current plan, would save taxpayers $192 million. So this is commissioned by the Greens, I believe. So the Greens were like, hey, Parliamentary Budget Office, can you have a look into the figures that the government's been throwing around about, like how much it would cost to phase out the logging industry? Can you check how much it would cost us to just shut it down now? And the Budget Office has said, way cheaper to shut it down now, which is pretty big news, considering that the Victorian government, one of their favourite things is to keep the logging industry open. That's what they give themselves for their birthdays. As a bunch of new lease on life for the logging industry. Never shut it down. Bushfires, don't worry about it. Keep logging them. We love it.
Yeah, no, the Victorian and the New South Wales states have had so much logging since the bushfires. It's fucking unbelievable. I mean, it's super lucky for them.
But they're doing a good job responding to coronavirus, Mitch. Yeah, so in response to this report from the Parliamentary Budget Office, Agriculture Minister in Victoria, Jacqueline Symes, said, yes, it would be cheaper, but it would put thousands of people out of work. Jacqueline Symes, you might remember that name from episode 11 of this very podcast. We were talking about how she said that gas drilling would not harm the environment. We'll come back to that claim later, but I was reading this thing about like, okay, we can save $192 million by shutting down logging now. Jacqueline Symes is like, but that would put thousands of people out of work. And I'm just like, let's do some quick maths. Let's say that there's like 10,000 people out of work, right? We could just split that $192 million between them. That's $20,000 each.
Yeah, that's a redundancy
payment. That's pretty good. And we'd keep our forests. Sounds like a good deal to me.
Holy shit.
So
we could take that.
Happy to have sorted that out for you, Jacqueline Symes.
We could take that $20,000 for each of them and just give directly to their landlords.
Yeah.
I mean, we know, like I can say now that this is specifically ignoring every single proposed plan for a jobs guarantee in a Green New Deal, in that, like, you know, we can transfer workers who are currently in logging industries or in coal mining industries over to renewable industries. Many people have put that plan forward. And of course, we would completely support and agree with that as well. But that's not what she's saying.
Yeah, they conveniently forget about the idea. All of these ideas just disappear as soon as they've stopped hearing it. Like, as soon as you finish saying the sentence, they're like, okay, cool, that's a ridiculous idea and I'll never think about it again. And then somebody's like, can we shut down the industry? They're like, well, people would be out
just
of work.
Memory
it's
of
like,
a goldfish, but specifically
we just had a meeting about how we can save those jobs so easily. So just a little bit more news about old mate Jacqueline Symes. This is in response to this claim about the gas drilling. A report's come out showing that the gas drilling modelling that Labor used to determine the environmental impact didn't account for burning that gas. It's just drilling the gas up.
We're just going to keep it in
then
a
keeping
jar.
it. That's the project. Just keep it. Just get it out of the ground because we don't want it in the ground.
McDonald's is super healthy for you. Oh, we didn't factor in if you eat it or not. It's just...
Yeah.
What the fuck are you talking about?
So, yeah, look, I take it back, Jacqueline Symes. I said that your claim that gas drilling would not harm the environment. I said it was stupid. I said that you were an idiot. I said that you suck, and I said that you were trash. Maybe not all of that made it on the podcast. I went on a 25-minute rant, just down a list of insults around how bad at your job you are. But I take it all back. I didn't realize that you just wanted to keep the gas in barrels and never burn it. So
Joke's on you, Tom.
Joke's on me. Yep. Egg on my face.
Actions this week. Listen to Trash Future podcast. Evie, why should we do that?
You should do that because we definitely don't have the time or necessarily the background info to go into this, but a report came out this week in the UK into the inner machinations in the Labour Party over the last year in the lead up to the 2019 election. And it proved basically what every leftist, socialist, anyone on the grounds and in the UK Labour Party realised, and it was that Jeremy Corbyn got extremely rat-fucked by his own co-workers, all who were in the centre, third way sort of alliance.
What's rat-fucking, Evie?
Do I have to explain everything to you? Basically, they didn't want a left swing in the party, and they decided to destroy him by any means possible. And that includes fake anti-Semitism claims.
I know we weren't going to go into it, but one of my favourite things of that report is that fully, like, about at least one third of all the anti-Semitism complaints made about the Labour Party came from one person.
Oh, it was more than 1/3. I think it was the majority of the complaints. Sounds like one or two. Some really, like, aside from that, like, you know, the personal attacks on Jeremy Corbyn himself, on other Labour ministers who are aligned to him, just some really horrific personal shit in there. There was just some awful comments about Diane Abbott. Shout out to her. She's fantastic. And it's such I can't imagine how it must feel to be on the left in the Labour Party and to realise that this entire time, despite all your work, all your effort, you've done your very best to try and move that Overton window left. And everyone there was just working against you the entire time. So the Trash Future is they're a really great UK podcast, and I really recommend catching up on them talking about the report. And just it's a great podcast generally about UK politics.
Never-ending actions for you to take this week before the next Not Good Enough podcast. Tell people about us. Share it. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter.
We're on YouTube.
Go and tell 2 people you think might like it to jump on our socials. Check us out. We've got the episodes on YouTube. We're on Spotify as well. Just get 2 people involved if they like it. And then I reckon tell those 2 people about 2 podcasts. Tell them about ours and then tell them about something else. Trash Future, Chapo, the Pork and Feed the Birds, anything like that. Get it sort of going. And if you're thinking about starting a podcast, start one.
There's never been a better time.
Thanks again for listening to Not Good Enough. If you want to send us an email, that is notgoodpod@protonmail.com, and all the different socials @notgoodpod.
Yay!
Not Good Enough was recorded on the lands of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and we acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.